GNGR, Clean and Grow Radio.
Weekend Review. Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining the GNGR Week in Review. Your host, Pastor Scott. And if you are joining us on the YouTube, you would see that I am all alone today. All of my compadres, they left me to fend for myself, out of town and various things going on. But I'm here. Hopefully that'll be a help and a blessing to you. Got a lot of news to go over this that happened this past week, and I want to begin today by simply reading a portion of Scripture. I want to remind you of something that God said in Genesis chapter 9. And Genesis chapter 9 is the blessing of Noah and the promise that's given after the flood. And it says in verse number 9, it says, and I, behold, I, this is God speaking, establish my covenant with you and with your seed after you. Continues on verse number 11, it says, and I will establish my covenant with you. And verse number 12, it says this, it says, and God said, this is the token of the covenant which I have made between me and you, and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations. I do set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be for a token of a covenant between me and the earth. And it shall come to pass when I bring a cloud over the earth, that the bow shall be seen in the cloud. And I will remember my covenant, which is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh, and the waters shall no more become a flood to destroy all flesh. And the bow shall be in the cloud, and I will look upon it, that I may remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is upon the earth. And God said unto Noah, this is the token of the covenant which I have established, between me and all flesh that is upon the earth. And so in that passage of Scripture, we have the giving of the token of the covenant, well, the covenant itself, but then also the token, which is a signal or a sign of that covenant. And as we look in this passage of Scripture, there's a couple things to note, many things to note, but one that I want to make sure and mention is that multiple times we see God saying, this is my covenant. See, this is an unconditional covenant. God is making this covenant with man, and he's given us this token. It's a promise. It's a promise that God would no longer destroy man on the earth by way of flood. The flood, the worldwide flood in which God had brought during Noah's time. God said he wouldn't do that anymore, and we can look up in the sky whenever there's a cloud come by. Saw some this past week. Whenever there's a cloud come by, we can look up and see the bow in the cloud and remember that promise that God has made. And sadly, it has been perverted. Man has taken something that is good and made it ungodly. Well, the colors itself is not ungodly, but what it represents certainly is. Because what it represents today is the sodomite agenda, the LGBTQ plus hashtag whatever. And I've got a story here. I just want to start out with this, but I want you to understand that those colors, the colors of the rainbow, they are not the colors of the gays. They have no right to claim that. In fact, God said in Isaiah 5:20, he said, woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. That's what they have done. They've taken something good and they have made it to represent something that is absolutely wicked. And the story that I have deals with that, and that's why I wanted to lead off with it. A Central Washington University student has been arrested after being accused of stealing and burning the school's LGBTQ plus pride flag and posting it online, according to officials. President Jim Walpart is the president of the university, confirmed that the pride flag outside the Student Recreation Center was stolen and burned while being filmed for social media. And he says, this is an appalling act of hate against the LGBT community, the letter states. It goes on to say, the letter also mentions support for students, faculty, and staff, including, listen to this, counseling resources. And so because a student got online and took that flag and burned it, they are offering counseling resources. He said, we are greatly disturbed that our CWU LGBTQ plus community had to endure this violation of their identity. This act diminished all of us. This is especially true during Pride Month, when many LGBTQ plus CWU students, faculty, and staff celebrate and memorialize their communities and commemorate the Stonewall riots, celebrating riots. We will not tolerate these types of actions that reduce the identity of others, make them feel unwelcome, and decrease their sense of safety and belonging. So the student was arrested, I assume, for stealing and vandalism. And I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm not saying that he should not have been arrested. But it's just curious to me, because I wonder, this is just me. I wonder if someone had posted or hung a Andrew's Cross flag outside their dorm or outside whatever. The university certainly wouldn't. It had to have been someone personally do it. And what I mean by Andrew's Cross is what is known today as the Confederate flag. It was actually the Confederate battle flag. It's known as Andrew's Cross because Andrew, the apostle, was crucified on a X-shaped cross, not one like as of Christ was crucified, but one X-shaped, and that's why they call it Andrew's Cross. I just wonder, if someone had stolen an Andrew's Cross, a Confederate battle flag, and burned it and filmed it, if the CWU would offer counseling to those people. I wonder even if they would have arrested them or if they'd have celebrated them. For a lot of people, the Confederate battle flag, and that's what it was a battle flag. It wasn't the national flag. The national flag had that incorporated into it, the final one being the flag up in the corners, such as the stars are on the American flag, and then white for the rest of it, and then a red stripe down the end of it. That's the one they settled on, the Confederate States of America. That's the one they settled on for their national flag. But just the Andrew's Cross was the battle flag. There's a lot of people today that had a lot of relatives that bled and died for the cause of the South. And the cause of the South, I know whenever you talk about that, people want to say, oh, well, they fought and died for slavery. Yeah, okay. Well, it's interesting. It's interesting that people think that, because the fact of the matter is history has certainly been rewritten in that sense. The majority of soldiers that fought for the South, they had no interest in slaves, because the majority of them, the large part, 90+%, had no slaves. They could not afford slaves. Slaves were simply, people that the rich had. And let me tell you what, the poor Southerners did not go and fight and die so that the rich man would have his slaves that would possibly take work away from them if they needed it. That wasn't the case. The war against the South was fought. Certainly slavery was that was an issue of the times. But that was not the issue in which it was fought over. And if you don't believe me, just actually read true history and not what, the public education is force feeding people today. There's just questions that I would have. Number one, I don't understand that, if the North fought to free the slaves while there were still slaves in the North after, the war was over. I don't understand how Ulysses S. Grant during the war had his own slaves. I don't understand that. And I don't understand how the war started in 1861, but President Lincoln did not give the Emancipation Proclamation until 2 years later in 1863 when the war effort was not going well. They were okay. They were okay having slaves. The majority of them, they were okay having slaves. They just wanted the product of the slaves at the price they wanted to pay. You get to studying that and you'll find out some really, really interesting history. And that leads me to a story. I'll mention it later. But anyway, you have counseling offered because someone took down a rainbow flag and burn it. I mean, talk about the wimpification of Americans today. Moving on, if you eat at Burger King, and you are a Christian and against the sodomite agenda in our country, you might want to think twice about it at least this month, if not in perpetuity. This story I have here today, and that is Burger King sent out some tweets. Let me just read you the tweet instead of give you the headline. The hashtag #ChickKing says LGBTQ plus rights, ! During Pride Month, even on Sundays, this is a stab at Chick-fil-A. Your chicken sandwich craving can do good. We are making a donation to HRC, that's the Human Rights Campaign, the nation's largest LGBTQ advocacy group. We are making a donation to them, HRC, for every Chick King sold. So you go and buy that sandwich at Burger King, and it's a good sandwich. Listen, I got to admit, it's a good sandwich. I'll not eat any more of them, but it's a good sandwich. It says a follow-up tweet said the donation period will run through June 30th, and for every Chick King sold, BK will distribute 40 cents to the Human Rights Campaign, with a max donation topping out at $250,000. And so Burger King obviously is all for promoting the sodomite agenda. And so if you go to Burger King this month and you buy one of those delicious chicken sandwiches, just know that 40 cents of your money is going to fund the sodomite agenda. That's just the way it is. So, I would, like I said, I'm not, I have too, I don't have enough money to waste frivolously, something like that. I don't have the money to waste like that, and I certainly don't want my hard-earned money going to a cause such as that. And so that's my choice. You can make your own choice there. Now, before we get into more of the the fruit that falls from the Sodom tree, I want to look at some of the other stories that have come out this past week. Speaking of which, we had Vacation Bible School this past week at our church. Man, and it was wonderful. We had a great time, Vacation Bible School. Thank God a soul was saved from eternal damnation by putting their faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. What a wonderful time we had at Vacation Bible School. Our Vacation Bible School was Big Fish Bay, and the theme of it this week was on the story of Jonah. Now, some people, they think, man swallowed by a whale, blah, blah, whatever. Fantasyland, right? They don't think. And, but you have to, remember this, just whatever esteem you hold in, Jesus in, if you hold Jesus in high esteem, even the Muslims hold Jesus in high esteem, right? Whatever esteem you might happen to hold Jesus in, just understand that Jesus verified the account. Jesus himself said that just as Jonah was in the belly of the whale for 3 days and 3 nights, so will the Son of Man be in the heart of the earth for 3 days, or the belly of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. Jesus verified the account. But I said during the message last night to the kids and the parents, I was talking about his trials. I was talking about Jonah's trials and how he was going through the belly of the whale, how that must have been terrifying. I said, I don't know anybody that is in the belly of the whale. I said, you might know. I said, I don't know anybody that has been in the deep and then swallowed up by a whale and lived to tell about it. Well, sure enough, last night I see this story. Massachusetts lobster diver survives being swallowed by a whale. And he, suffered some bumps or bruises and such. He wasn't in there 3 days and 3 nights, right? But he says anyway that he was in there. He was in there, and then the whale vomited him up. So I thought that was it was an interesting story that we would see there. Oh, let's see what else are we. I'm going to go down just through some topics that we're not going to delve into completely here today, and we're not going to get into the critical race theory. I don't think we'll have time for that. I've got all kinds of other stuffs on the agenda, but I do have a few stories with there. Had a Chinese woman who escaped Mao's purge in the 70s and 80s, and she spoke. I believe it was at the Loudoun County school board meetings down there. She spoke about how she survived that, and she was drawing the similarities between what Mao did and in the purge, where depending on who you believe, 500,000 to 20 million hours, some crazy number of people were killed for not falling into the communist line. And anyway, she was drawing the similarities between what she saw and what is happening and what is being pushed with this critical race theory. How back then they were separating people between economic lines. They were dividing people, the rich versus middle class versus poor, and they were getting them to hate each other. Well, she says, the same thing is happening, and that's exactly what the Democrats try to do today. They play the class warfare. They try to get the poor people to hate the rich people, and the middle class to hate the rich people, and the rich people to hate the poor people for hating them. That actually still happens here, but she was drawing the comparison on that, how, you have the same thing as far as purposeful division of people happening today with race. You are dividing. There's a movement out there, and critical race theory is a proponent of it. The whole purpose is to divide people. To divide white people from black people, and black people from white people, and black people to hate white people as the oppressors, and white people to hate black people as, the victims, the oppressed, or whatever. And then you fit the Asians and all that stuff that's going on with that today. She drew those comparisons. That was a very interesting take on CRT, critical race theory. And then you had. Let's see. Just so you know, Loudoun County, Virginia, is where the teacher that we played I can't remember if we played the soundbite or not, but there was a teacher there that he decided that he was not going to go by their policy and call boys girls and girls boys. He said, that would be lying to the child and dishonoring my God. He wouldn't do it, so he was suspended. I've got an update on that story here that we'll get to after a while. The story out on Breitbart this past week said Joe Biden said the N-word 13 times in the Senate. That came out because Hunter Biden was using it in texts. Of course, I don't know if you heard about that, but that was reported, but it was quickly swept under the rug. Let's see. Pastor's religious freedom was not violated when he was arrested for holding church in Canada. In Canada, they arrested that pastor. He was in jail for 30-some days. There was a few different pastors got in trouble with the law. This one, I can't remember his name. He's a younger fella. He was arrested and held in jail. And they said that the reason his religious freedom wasn't violated was because all he had to do was say that he would not hold services anymore, and he could have been let go. But he refused to do that. Because he knew he was going to hold services, because that's what God had ordained, and that's what he had set his mind to do. And so, therefore, he was detained. But they said, well, you could have got out because of this. His religious freedom wasn't violated. Again, that's Canada. I don't know about Canada's laws, but it's not America. And so I know what rights we have or supposed to have here in America. I don't know, 100% on what they're supposed to have in Canada. So therefore, I can't speak too much on that. There was a John Rahm. He was playing golf in a PGA tournament. He was ahead by, I think, 6 strokes, if I remember correctly. And he tested positive for, or either tested positive for COVID or was around somebody that tested positive for COVID. He had to withdraw from the round. And, Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's the congressman, I think, either out of Kentucky or Tennessee. She spoke out on how she doesn't believe in evolution, and I agree with what she said. I don't believe in microevolution, and that is going from kinds from one species to another. That is obviously not true, never happened, but microevolution on the other hand, and that is changes within kinds, that has happened and will continue to happen. And I think that's what she was referring to, and if she was, then she was in error there. Kamala Harris also gifted the reporters on the plane on her monumental trip down to Guatemala to, get at the root causes of the border crisis. She gifted the reporters with cookies with her likeness, minus her face. Narcissism at its finest. Got a lot of news to go over this week on the other side of the break.
GNGR, Clean and Grow Radio.
Weekend Review. Here at GNGR Radio, we are doing our best to put forth truly God-centered, God-focused programming, from the music that we broadcast to the preaching. And it's the preaching that I want to focus on for a minute and give you some of the scheduling that we have here at GNGR. Monday through Friday, we have a preaching block of old-fashioned, old-time Bible preaching and teaching beginning at 11 a.m. with the Gospel Hour with preacher Oliver B. Green. Then we have Brother Lester Roloff and the Family Altar program. Then at 11:45, we have a good friend of mine, Evangelist Buddy Sizemore out of North Carolina, with the Good News broadcast. Then at noon, we have the Gleaning and Growing Preaching Hour, followed by Through the Bible with Brother J. Vernon McGee. I do hope that you're able to tune in and glean and grow from the preaching and teaching of the Word of God. Now, there's more information on these programs, as well as podcast offerings we have to download and listen at your leisure on our website, www.gngr.live. That's www.gngr.live. Once again, that's Monday through Friday, beginning at 11 a.m. Until then, may God richly bless you along your way.
GNGR, Clean and Grow Radio.
Weekend Review. Hello and welcome back. Thank you for joining the GNGR Week in Review. If you are just joining us, I'm flying solo today. All my compadres are out. So we're just going to do the best we can in giving you updates and analysis on what has taken place over the past week. I saw a couple. So let me give you one more. It says NASCAR slowing cars on super speedways for safety after Logano's scary Talladega crash. I don't know about you. If you've watched racing at all, you've seen a lot of scary crashes, and they've done what they could to, try to make it safer. But at some point, I mean, you have to understand it's racing. It's racing. Logano, from what I understand, I don't watch anymore. I used to be very heavily involved in NASCAR, but I can't get into it anymore. But evidently, Logano, he went airborne and came out fine. Wasn't hurt at all. I guess it looked scary, and I'm sure it was. Listen, I wouldn't have wanted to, experience that. But I'm not a race car driver, right? And neither are you. So, but these guys know, and they know when they get in the car that things can happen. But I guess NASCAR is going to slow down the cars on the super speedways, which would be Talladega, Daytona. I don't know if any others are restrictor plate races or not. There weren't anyway before. But a lot of people would say, I would be one of them, that the reason you have these crazy crashes at Talladega and Daytona is because they've went in and put in the restrictor plates, which restricts the flow of the gasoline engine, restricts the amount of speed that they can achieve. And because of that, there is no separation in the cars, I guess unless you're really bad. But there's no separation in the cars. And they drive in these packs. And so they're driving in these packs at 200 mile an hour, just in a continuous loop, throughout, for hours, literally for hours. They're driving in this pack, and it's inevitable. It is inevitable. Someone is going to drift a little far. Someone's going to get slightly loose when the air comes off their bumper, and they're going to have the wreck, and it's going to be a massive wreck. And, there's been, and I can't say this, I don't know that there's been more fatalities since the restrictor plate races. I would almost go there, but I don't know the history, so I can't really say that. There's just no separation. Back in the Bill Elliott days, back when racing was racing, back in the 80s, when you wrecked somebody, there was a fight in the pits. Back then, when they saw a fast car like Bill Elliott's coming around, the slower guys, they just got over. They got over. That's about all they could do. They just got over. So Bill Elliott and them fast boys could get around them. So you had less pileups like you do now in the restrictor plate races. But anyway, I guess NASCAR, they can just go ahead and drop the speeds down to 50 mile an hour, and that'll be safe. That'll be safe. So anyway, all right, moving on. Continuing on in our news on the fruit that falls from the Sodom tree. I've got some other stories here, but one that I did not print out that I want to just go ahead and mention, and that is Virginia Tech linebacker allegedly killed somebody. And what happened was this Virginia Tech linebacker got on, I think it was some app. I don't have the story in front of me, but I think it was some app, and he got hooked up with what he thought was a girl. They had a sexual encounter, and when I was describing this story before, someone said, "How did he not know?" The best I'm going to describe it is they did not have sex. They had a sexual encounter. The first time, he went back and went and met this person again, and that is when he found out. that what he thought was a woman, in fact, was not. And he was angry, as I could understand, right? I can understand that. He would be angry. And he beat the guy to death, is what happened. Are you excusing that preacher? Absolutely not. I'm not. In fact, I condemn the entirety of the everything that was involved. I don't condone any of that. The fact of the matter was, if he had done what what is of God, and that is waited till marriage to have sex or sexual intercourse, then he wouldn't have been in that situation. Wouldn't have, felt violated or whatever it was that he was feeling at that time, and committed the heinous act that he did. But I don't understand. I don't understand. If you're a trans person, if you're a guy trying to be a girl, listen, I don't think that's something that you would hide until you get to that point. That's just not safe at all. But again, if that Virginia Tech linebacker had not sinned in the first place, it would not have led to the secondary sin that followed. You see, and that's a lesson really for all of us, because, sin typically is not isolated. I don't know if you could ever say that it ever is. We could look at David in the story of David. David sinned by not leading his people into battle. He sinned by taking comfort and let others fight the battle instead. There's a whole lesson there. Man, we could go off on so many tangents today. But there's a lesson right there. I mean, there are a handful of people that are fighting the battle against this sodomite agenda. I'm trying to be one of them. But unfortunately, there's too many people that are quiet. There's just too many people that are quiet about it. That'll lead me to my next story in a minute, but let me make my point first. David, had he not sinned there, he would not have been at the house upon the rooftop gazing upon another man's wife. Had he not been gazing upon another man's wife, he would not have brought another man's wife into his bed. Had he not brought another man's wife into his bed, he would have not have impregnated another man's wife. Had he not impregnated another man's wife, he would not have devised a plot and end up committing murder to hide, or try to hide, because he didn't hide it, to try to hide his second, third, fourth, fifth sin in the whole series of events. He would not have tried to hide it and committed murder. And so sin always kind of leads to another, unless you do what Barney Fife says and nip it in the bud. And whenever we get outside the will of God, whenever we do sin, if we will do that, then that will stop that chain of events from progressing. But as we see in this Virginia Tech article, had he not tried to fulfill, had he not done what Isaiah 5:20 speaks against, had he not done that, he'd have been fine. Isaiah 5:20, let me remind you once again, because I use this verse in speaking of the colors of God, the colors of the rainbow. And I said in Isaiah 5:20, it says, "Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter." You see, God is the author of sex. God is the author of that, and it is good within the confines of which God had intended it. It is, let me just say, the best within the confines in which God has intended it. But in our society today, man, we are just so lax about it. We are so nonchalant about taking what God has made for good and turning it into wickedness and turning it into evil to satisfy our own lusts. And speaking about David allowing others to go fight the battle, which he should have been waging. Every Christian that understands the Word of God and understands what God said about sodomy, God said, and God defined what is male and what is female. That is God's creation, not ours, and not the creation of our mind, as so many sodomites are promoting it to be, and so much in the trans community is trying to make it be. It's sex, and I'm not talking about the physical act right now. I'm talking about the designation of gender is biological, not mental. We all, as Christians, should be fighting this battle. We have no choice but to fight this battle because the battle has come to us. There's a battle in which victory was had in the United Kingdom that I want to tell you about. There's a lady by the name of Maya Forrester who was a contract worker for, what was the name of her company? I have it here in one of these two stories. The name of her company was a think tank called Center for Global Development. Well, she had, and let me just read this to you, kind of give you this situation, the layout of what Miss Forrester experienced. It says, Miss Forrester was working at the Center for Global Development in 2019 when she published messages on her personal Twitter account, including the statement that male people were not women. Duh.
Let's end the politics and follow the science.
It led to complaints from her colleagues who said that the statements were transphobic. And as a result, her visiting fellowship was not renewed, and she was offered no more consultancy work. She lodged a claim for direct discrimination as a result of her, quote, gender critical belief. Okay, gender critical. That is what, I don't know, she termed, or what the term has come about in the story, of people that don't hold to the, multiple, 3, 4, any type gender argument that the trans people are pushing today. If you believe that God made man male and female, then you are gender critical, is the terminology, okay? So she lodged a claim for direct discrimination as a result of her, quote, gender critical belief that sex is biologically immutable and that men are adult males and women are adult females. That's as basic and logical as can be. But she lost the argument. It was seen as a test case in December 2009, with an employment judge ruling that there was no legal right to question whether a transgender person is a man or a woman. It said the panel had concluded that her belief had not passed the test of, quote, being worthy of respect in a democratic society. Is that not amazing? That the way she thought was simply that biological males were males, biological females were females. In other words, if you had the anatomy of a male, you were a male. If you had the anatomy of a female, you were a female. And the judge said that that was not worthy of respect in a democratic society. The same way as Nazism or totalitarianism. Totalitarianism. There you go. That's what the judge said. She appealed it. And thank God she did appeal it, because she won her appeal. An employment tribunal had ruled that her gender critical belief that someone cannot change their sex was so offensive to trans people that it could not be protected under the Equality Act of Freedom of Speech laws. That decision was overturned at the Employment Appeals Tribunal on Thursday, as Mr. Justice Chowdhury, sitting with a panel, ruled that they, quote, may well be profoundly offensive and even distressing to others, but they are beliefs that are and must be tolerated in a pluralist society. In other words, in a society that not everybody thinks the same way. In a society that is not like China. Because if you hold various thoughts in China, well, you are exterminated. Because there is no law greater than state. There is no God that they appeal to in China. In Marxists and socialists' ideology, the first thing that goes is God. And the reason that God goes is because they want the government to have the final say. Does any of this sound familiar? Does this mentality sound familiar? That God does not give rights. God does not make human anatomy. God does not do this. Government says so. It's the manner in which we're headed. And so J.K. Rowling, she's the woman that wrote the Harry Potter books. I don't have much to say about that. But she, in going against the grain, she actually spoke up in defense of this woman some year ago or whatever. A lot of people read those Harry Potter books. A lot of people. And, there's a lot of people that thinks where it celebrates witchcraft or something like that, and so any Christian ought to have no part of it. And I can understand that, but I don't know enough about them to be forceful in a stance such as that. But regardless, as far as J.K. Rowling said in this regard, it was spot on. But let me just read you. Maya Forrester, the lady who was fired for simply saying adult males are men, adult females are women, she put out a YouTube video, and some of the things said this. Says, in a YouTube video statement Forrester posted on Thursday, she calls out the author for her support. Quote, a year ago today, J.K. Rowling published her essay about sex and gender and why she spoke up. She wrote about me in my employment tribunal, where it was judged that the belief that sex is real, immutable, and important was unworthy of respect in a democratic society. Quoting the judge in the decision, she wrote about the culture of fear in organizations, and she said the one thing that gave her hope was that more and more people were speaking up. Thousands of ordinary people supported my case. Today, I'm pleased and proud to say that I have been vindicated. And so this leads me back to my story of David and how David was sitting there in the mansion, in the palace, as his people were off to war. Christian, let me tell you something. The battle, it's not one that we have sought out. It is one that is seeking us out. It is one that is seeking to destroy what God said is good. Seeking to destroy God's very creation. When he looked upon man, he didn't even say it was good. He said, boy, it was very good. It was very good. And so we need to fight. We don't need people sitting at the palace eating their grapes while others are out fighting the battle. Will you join me? Got more on the other side of the break.
GNGR, Clean and Grow Radio.
Weekend Review. Friend, this is Pastor Scott, and I want to express my gratitude to you for joining the program today, but I also want to ask you for your help. This ministry, both the radio ministry as a whole and the programming that you're listening to right now, is in need of partners. Now, we are trying to do what God has called us to do with this ministry, but we simply cannot do it alone. Just as in the case of Nehemiah, we are in need of God's people to come along beside us and rebuild the walls that have been broken down in this country. We need help in this ministry in 3 major areas, and I have no doubt that you can help in at least one of them, if not them all. Now, the first thing, and by far the most important thing that we need, is we need prayer partners. Prayers can do what dollars can't. Prayers can do what distribution can't. Please, please pray for this ministry. This is something that all Christians can do. Pray that it will get the support and exposure it needs to make a difference in the hearts and minds of people. Secondly, we need financial partners. In order to operate this station, we have a number of different expenses and overheads such as equipment, fees, licensing, and so on. Please consider the possibility that God may be calling you to help sustain this endeavor financially. Either on a recurring basis or one-time gift, any and all donations would be a blessing. Lastly, we need distribution partners. This ministry will only reach those who know about it. And the best way we can make people aware of this ministry, whether it's the musical offerings or the preaching or the week in review news analysis, is to tell them about it. Please share the website, share the podcast, share the YouTube and Rumble clips, like, subscribe, post, text, whatever you can do to let others know and encourage them to check it out would be a tremendous blessing to this ministry as well. Now, if you believe that this program and information will help combat the ungodly nature that is setting in our society, then you can do at least one of these things to further the cause of Christ in these last days. I thank you. I so appreciate your prayers and support for this ministry. God bless.
GNGR, Clean and Grow Radio.
Weekend Review. Hello and welcome back. Thank you for joining the GNGR Weekend Review. If you have something you'd like to add to the conversation, the number to call or text is 304-916-7845. That's 304-916-7845. Listen, if you have a different view, of that, if you hold the opinion that we as Christians, we shouldn't judge, we shouldn't judge people, or whatever the case may be. If you think that God ordained sodomy, that it's okay for a man to lay with a man and a woman to lay with a woman, you're welcome to call. Be glad to have that conversation. Speaking of that, I've got a lot more news on this topic, but honestly, I'm getting tired of talking about it. I've got a little more. If we have time at the end of the program, we'll revisit and get a few of those. But I've got some other stuff that I want to get to. Speaking of just the, well, let's just set that to the side for now. I do want to get to this story, though. Last week, we gave you a story, and I'm not sure, the audio did not come through on YouTube, so I don't know why it did not. I don't know if it was somehow censored. I don't know if it came through on the radio. It's hard to, do it and then listen at the same time. But we gave you this story about a elite private school in Manhattan that had a woman teaching sex education to 5- and 6-year-olds. And we played a snippet of the cartoon that was played for this children. But as I got another story here, and it's amazing. I encourage you to do this. Listen, if the only place you get your news is from one of America's newsrooms, even Fox News, CNN, especially if it's CNN or MSNBC, but even if it's Fox News, even if that's who you get your news from, I think the more I am more and more convinced that the most unbiased, I don't know if I can say unbiased, but at least inclusive reporting is coming from overseas at the UK and the Daily Mail. The Daily Mail put out this story, and it's similar to the story that we read you last week that came from Fox News, but there's so much more in it, so much more that we need to speak about. But it's an update. I told the woman, and her name. What is her name? Justine Ang Fonte. She looks doesn't matter. But she showed cartoons and was teaching 5- and 6-year-olds sex education. 5- and 6-year-olds sex education. And she played a cartoon, and I played a clip of the cartoon. I want to do that again now. This part of the clip, not the entirety of it, but part of the clip. And I want you to hear what they were playing for these 5 and 6-year-olds. We had Vacation Bible School. We had kids from all ages there. We had plenty of 5- and 6-year-olds. I cannot imagine what would possess someone other than Satan to play what this is for 5- and 6-year-olds. And just as I said last week, I'm going to implore you again. If you are listening to this with a child in earshot, cover their ears, tell them to go in another room or something so they don't hear this, because I don't want to be part of the problem. But you need to be aware of what is happening to children in our country, because, the poisons that begin in big cities, they filter down to the little ones. It's just the way it is. And so, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, here is a portion of the cartoon that was shown to 5- and 6-year-olds.
My penis gets big sometimes and points up in the air.
That's called an erection.
Sometimes I touch my penis because it feels good.
Sometimes when I'm in my bath or when Mom puts me to bed, I like to touch my vulva too.
You have a clitoris there, Kayla, that probably feels good to touch the same way Keith's penis feels good when he touches it. But have you ever...
So that's just part of it. And why? And why you teach 5- and 6-year-olds this is beyond me. But there's an agenda behind it, and please do not mistake that it's all in good fun, or it's all in for a righteous cause. They think that this is something to get them understanding. No, it's called grooming. We're going to get more to that here in just a minute. But the lady that taught this Miss Fontaine, she is now leaving that private school. She's resigning after this was brought forward and people found out what has been taking place. It's amazing to me. Think about this for a minute. I wonder, how much of what we are learning about what is being taught in public school we have learned in the past year because of the whole COVID mess and parents having to stay home and walk their kids through their education and getting more of an insight as to what their kids are being taught. I wonder if that is a blessing that God is given us in the midst of all this COVID reaction. Because I wonder how long this stuff's been going on that parents just don't know about. I mean, kids aren't going to come home typically and talk about this, right? Because they're getting a different message from home. And so in announcing the resignation of this woman, the school took great pains to let people know that they were backing her work. They said this. They said, Dalton, our faculty, staff, administration, and trustees continue to stand firmly behind this program and those who teach it. This, what you just heard, this filth that is being pushed upon children, 5- and 6-year-olds. This school stands behind it. I wonder why.
Where's the money?
At faculty and staff meetings this week, Justine announced her decision to leave Dalton to focus on her work as an independent health educator. She has been working toward this goal for over a year. We support Justine's aspirations and look forward to honoring her aspirations as this academic year comes to a close. And one of the parents commented, said, your inability to recognize a mistake is strange. But as we look through the rest of the story, now I already gave you, just the cartoon. That's all I really told you about was a cartoon. But there's more to the story. There was, in the story, there was five different, where's that? I had to print out 8 pages of this. 5 classes on gender identity. 5 different classes on gender identity is what they gave. And she said, it's simply indoctrination. It's nothing more. Those who complained to the school administrators were told they had misinterpreted the lessons. The Post reported earlier this year. And as our so eloquent
Where's the money?
sound file tells us, it says this. Now, here's part of the story that you got from the UK that you didn't get from the US. Hedge fund billionaire Bill Ackman's Perishing Square Foundation provided the school where his ex-wife Karen is on the board of trustees with a $450,000 grant, which reportedly funded the work. And so that's what you get from a UK paper that you didn't get from a US paper. Interesting. So follow the money. But as I said, this was not the only, it wasn't just a cartoon, right? It wasn't just that. There was other stuff too. Let me go ahead and give you some of that. The Post also recently revealed that Fonte led, quote, porn literacy workshops on May 5th at a $47,000 a year Columbia Grammar and Preparatory School in Manhattan's Upper West Side. So at another school, this one's, the lower class one, it's only $47,000 a year. The first one's $55,000 a year. The school, once attended by Barron Trump, allegedly forced juniors to attend a compulsory workshop on porn, which included lessons on incest role play and OnlyFans. The students at Columbia Grammar and Preparatory School on Manhattan's Upper West Side were told to watch a slideshow entitled Pornography Literacy, an Intersectional Focus on Mainstream Porn. Most of the 120 students between the ages of 16 and 17 who attended the lecture watched it on Zoom from home. The teens were also shown statistics on the, quote, orgasm gap, showing straight women have fewer than their partners, with their partners than gay men or lesbians. Students were also shown photos of partially nude women, some of whom were in bondage, to analyze what is porn and what is art. Additionally, the slideshow included a list of the most searched pornographic terms in 2019, including, and I'm not going to repeat it, but it lists them out, and it gives a picture of the graph from the slideshow. This is called grooming. If you know anything about child molestation, children are not typically just molested outright. It's the adult takes a child and has, sexual relations with that child. That's not the way it works. There is what is called a grooming period. And part of that grooming period, in I don't know if all cases, but in most cases, involves showing that child pornography. And they're doing this in schools, and they're doing it in schools that charge $47,000 a year. Who's going to stand up for the children? Who? Who is going to stand up for the children? Who is not, I mean, who's going to call this for what it is? It is grooming children to be molested. My wife was in Party City this past week, and as many of you know, it's Pride Month. I would term it Perversion Month because it celebrates perversion. It celebrates something that God never intended to be celebrated. In fact, God destroyed 2 cities over sodomy. And so she was in Party City, and she was there to get some things, I guess, for VBS. And in there, she had texted me a picture, and the picture was of a rainbow-colored heart, I think, if I remember correctly. And on it was the words says, love is love. That is the rallying cry for the sodomite agenda. Love is love. And I said, man, ask them what they mean by that. And what they're going to say is this: love is love. I mean, love should not be defined. It should not have borders such as gender. If a girl loves a girl, that ought to be okay. That ought to be fine. Who are you to say that this is right? Who are you to say that they can't love one another? I mean, isn't that what all Jesus is about, is love? Love is love, right? That's what they'll say. But what is the pedophile? What is the NAMBLA rep who is taking the same playbook of the sodomites? Because like it or lump it, many sodomites are interested in children, and many sodomites were molested by children. It's fact. How do you argue against love is love when it comes to an adult and a child? How do you argue against that? If love is love, then love is love, right? If there should be no bounds on gender, then why is there bounds on age? And that is the argument of the pedophile. Love is love. Who are you to say that child cannot enter into a consensual relationship with an adult? Who are you to say that? That is the argument. The rally cry is already out there. Love is love. That is their rally cry. We need to wake up in this country. We need to wake up. We are so far off the end. We have gone so far off the reservation, out of the will of God in this country. And too many Christians are sitting by on the hilltop when the battle's in the valley. More after the break.
GNGR, Clean and Grow Radio.
Weekend Review. Friend, I want to take a moment and tell you about our podcast offerings here at GNGR. Now, some of you might be thinking, what is a podcast and how much does it cost to play it? The truth is, you don't need any special hardware or anything like that to get a podcast, and the podcast itself doesn't cost you anything either. A podcast is simply a digital program that you can either download or stream to hear the program when you want to hear it. So if you miss a program, you can go back and listen to it, or if you like what you heard and you want to share it with someone else, you can do that there as well. Now, you can stream and or download the podcast for Gleaning and Growing Preaching Hour and the Week in Review on our website, www.gngr.live. If you just scroll down, you'll see the links to those podcasts right there. It'll take you there to them. So I pray this information was helpful to you, and it will give you an avenue to hopefully be blessed and share it with others so it may be a blessing to them as well.
GNGR, Glean and Grow Radio.
Weekend Review. Hello and welcome back. Thank you for joining the GNGR Weekend Review. As I mentioned earlier, flying solo today. Missing my compadres. Wishing them well on their day off. There's a story I want to share with you that was such a blessing to me. Such a blessing to me. I'm a hockey fan. I like hockey. I enjoy it. I don't make it a point to watch it, but if the Penguins are playing, I'll typically, if I'm not doing anything and it's on, then I'll watch it. Used to like hockey quite a bit. I used to like sports all told quite a bit. But unfortunately, sports went by the way of the woke generation and the political route, and I'm not going to support someone that supports that. So, I just, I don't care for it. But I saw this story, and it was the national anthem for the Islanders. Now, I could be upset with the Islanders because they beat the Penguins in the playoffs, but I'm not. We actually visited Staten Island one time, and, man, I was very impressed with the people there. You believe it or not. Staten Island, man, there's good people up there. And even if they were Yankees. But anyway, we had a good time up there, met a lot of nice people up there. Staten Island is kind of the blue-collar area of New York City, or at least one of them. But there at the Islanders game, they had this lady sing the national anthem, and she sang the first part, and then she dropped out and let the crowd sing. And, man, you talk about something that was just beautiful, just beautiful. That's what it was. I want to play that for you now.
Ladies and gentlemen, presenting tonight's colors is the New York State University Police. And now, please join Nicole Revive as we sing together our national anthem.
Oh, son, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed?
I tell you what, that has to be one of my favorite renditions of the Star Spangled Banner. The Whitney Houston one, of course, that was amazing. This one was amazing for a couple reasons. Number one, man, just hearing 12,000 people singing it, it was wonderful. But also, you notice when she sang it, man, she didn't jig it up. She just sang it. And so many people try to fancy it up and do all kinds of crazy stuff, and it just kind of, the whole meaning and thought of the song gets the attention. Instead of focused on America, it's focused on the singer. But, man, I loved it. Loved that. That was just absolutely amazing. So, I've got some stories that are just kind of out there. Just kind of out there. I don't know if you know this, but we now have a fifth sea upon the earth. Yes. We no more have four seas. National Geographic has added a fifth one. Just, I guess, out of nowhere. We did have the Atlantic, the Pacific, the Indian, the Arctic Oceans. Yes, gives me goosebumps too. Amen. Thank you for that. But now National Geographic has announced Tuesday that is officially recognizing the body of water surrounding the Antarctic as the Earth's fifth ocean. It's now going to be called the Southern Ocean. So we have the Atlantic, the Pacific, the Indian, the Arctic, and now the Southern Oceans. I guess science is evolving, right? I guess science is evolving. We got some COVID news with Dr. Fauci we'll get to here in a little bit on the evolving science of the COVID. So there's that. If you didn't know, we have 5 oceans now. I don't know what's happened, man. In my lifetime, we lost a planet and gained an ocean. None of this just makes any sense to me. There was a Virginia father. Now, this kind of blew my mind. The father of a Virginia teen paid his last child support payment by dumping 80,000 pennies on his estranged daughter's front lawn. WTVR.com reported that the teen and her mother collected the pennies. I'll tell you that in a minute. But Avery Sanford, who is 18 and hasn't spoken to her father in years, told the station that her father, who was not named in the report, rented a trailer and pulled in the front of her house in Richmond. He proceeded to dump the change in the grass. Her mother asked him what he was doing. He said, "It's your final child support payment." And so, boy, that's a winner right there. That's a winner right there. I've seen, I can't remember what it was, but there was some type of vindictive person before that they had to pay something they didn't want to pay. So they went out and got all these pennies, and they did the same thing. They dumped it all over someone's driveway. And then after that, they poured oil all over the pennies. I can't remember what that payment was for, but anyway, here it is, a father. This is a man who has not only a legal responsibility, but a moral responsibility, a spiritual responsibility to raise their child, to support their child. And he is so angered by the fact that he had to do this, that on the final payment, he takes and dumps 80,000 pennies on her lawn. I mean, that's just sorry. That's just sorry. But that speaks to the main problem. I say the main problem. One of the main problems in America today, and that is the lack of true fathers in the home, the lack of fathers raising their children. I would say that is the main problem. The main problem in America is the lack of God in the home, followed by the lack of fathers in the home. One feeds off the other. When you take God away, you take God's principles away. And one of God's principles is that the husband is to be the leader of the home, a guide to their children, a guard to their wife. And we've just got a society of sorry men, just too many of them, too many of them. I hope that you don't fall into that category. But there's that story there. Jeffrey Toobin is back with CNN. If you are unfamiliar with who Jeffrey Toobin is, Jeffrey Toobin was and is the senior legal talking head, I guess there's probably a better term for that. Analyst, that's the word, analyst. He's the senior legal analyst for CNN. Well, he's been off the air for 7 months, And if you don't know the story, I don't know how I can give you the story in a, well, I'll tell you this. I've got the sound clip, and rather than me tell the story and then play the sound clip where they're telling the story, you talk about awkward TV. Awkward TV was you had a reporter, a woman reporter, bringing Jeffrey Toobin back on the air and having this conversation. Okay. I did bleep out a few words, so, you know, it's just not words I necessarily wanted to play. But here is, where's it at? Here is the woman reporter, I'm not sure what her name is, interviewing Jeffrey Toobin on CNN on his return. And they go over why he's been off the air for 7 months.
Let's bring in CNN chief legal analyst Jeffrey Toobin to talk about this and more. Hi, Jeffrey.
Hello, Allison.
It's been a while.
It has been a while, indeed.
I feel like we should address what's happened in the months since we've seen you, since some of our viewers may not know what has happened. So I guess I'll recap. I'll do the honors.
Help yourself.
Okay. In October, you were on a Zoom call with your colleagues from the New Yorker magazine. Everyone took a break for several minutes, during which time you were caught masturbating on camera. You were subsequently fired from that job after 27 years of working there. And you, since then, have been on leave from CNN. Do I have all that right?
You got it all right, sad to say.
Okay, so let's start there.
Okay.
To quote Jay Leno, what the hell were you thinking?
Well, obviously, I wasn't thinking very well or very much, and it was something that was inexplicable to me. I think one point, I wouldn't exactly say in my defense, because nothing is really in my defense. I didn't think I was on the call. I didn't think other people could see me.
You thought that you had turned off your camera?
Correct. I thought that I had turned off the Zoom call. Now, that's not a defense. This was deeply moronic and indefensible, but I mean that is part of that is part of the story. And, you know, I have spent the 7 subsequent months, miserable months in my life, I can certainly confess, trying to be a better person. I mean, in therapy, trying to do some public service, working in a food bank, which I certainly am going to continue to do, working on a new book about the Oklahoma City bombing, but I am trying to become the kind of person that people can trust again.
So there's that. I think she went by the reason why he was off the air for 7 months. Now, I think he worked for the New York Times. They fired him. You know, they fired him. And I want you to understand something. I am glad we have a God of second chances. And I'm not against second chances. I really am not. But when it comes to this, I mean, just to kind of analyze what he was saying there, you know, they brought it out. There's no way around them not addressing this. I'm sure this wasn't in prime time. I'm sure they addressed this probably between, 2 and 3 o'clock or something when there's nobody watching. But either way, they had to address it to bring him back. And again, I'm not against, second chances. I'm not saying they should or shouldn't have given him one. Pretty egregious what he did. But it is amazing, in his response to it, he played at least 3 different roles that I could see. Number one, he played the victim. These 7 months, they've been miserable, most miserable in my life. So he played the victim there. Then he played the hero. He's talking about working in a food bank. What that has to do with doing what he did on a Zoom video call, I have no idea. But now he's playing the hero. He's working in a food bank, trying to be a better person. He's playing the intellectual. I'm trying to write a book, playing the intellectual, and then trying to feign humility in that, he was, it was moronic. Amen to that. It was moronic, doing what you did. But what strikes me about the whole incident, and like I said, I'm not here to necessarily say CNN should have done this and shouldn't have done this. That's their call. It's not my business. It's their call. I just find it amazing. And I think it speaks to understand the agenda for what is labeled a news organization such as CNN. You know, they label themselves a news organization, and they try to play it off as if they have no agenda. Let me tell you what, nothing could be further from the truth. They have an agenda. Jeffrey Toobin plays a part in that agenda. He probably has some dirt on the higher-ups there at CNN, but it's why he's back. But you know, when it comes to that, Jeffrey Toobin, he gets a second chance. I mean, he was literally, you know, doing perverse things on camera with colleagues, women on the call. He's doing that, and he gets a second chance. Chris Cuomo, you know, the brother of Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York. He is on a call with his brother trying to figure out how to play the press, which he is a part of. He's on a phone call, conference call with his brother and his lawyers on how to play the press when it comes to this sexual improprieties that the governor was accused of. He gets a second chance. Rick Santorum, a conservative, on the other hand, did not get a second chance. He got fired. Jeffrey Toobin didn't get fired for doing what he did. Chris Cuomo didn't get fired for doing what he did, but Rick Santorum, who is I believe he's a professing Christian and a Republican, he did get fired. And this is why he got fired. He said he gave a speech, and in that speech, he was offensive to the Native Americans and Native American culture. He said something along these lines. He says, "We birthed a nation from nothing." He was talking about how, you know, when we came back, well, let me just read the quote here. "We birthed a nation from nothing." I mean, there was nothing here. I mean, yes, we have Native Americans, but candidly, there isn't much Native American culture in American culture, and he's right about all of that. I don't think he's being disrespectful. He's absolutely right about that. He's talking about how the Pilgrims came over here to escape religious persecution, and there was nothing here. There was no infrastructure. There was no, there was no foundations. There was earth. There was grass. There was water. There was buffalo. That's all there was. There was nothing here but God's creation. And he said, speaking about the greatness of our founding and what God can do with pilgrims that'll just seek his face. He said, man, we birthed a nation from nothing. And that got him fired. Playing with yourself on camera doesn't get you fired. Working in cahoots with your brother who is under, I don't know if he is under investigation, but he certainly should have been under investigation. He certainly was in the press that wasn't CNN or MSNBC. When women came out and spoke up about the unwanted touching and everything that he's done, his brother, who is part of their news organization, is on a conference call with his lawyers trying to figure out how this would best play. And he doesn't get fired, but Rick Santorum does. So, again, I'm not against second chances. I'm glad God gives them to me. And so it's not necessarily my place to say whether they do or whether they don't. But this should get you to understand, the agenda that CNN has. And there is an agenda for certain. I've got plenty of other stories here. Let me peruse through a couple of them, and then get to. I've got some COVID information with Dr. Fauci I want to get to, and then I've got some specifically church-related issues that I want to deal with today as well. Speaking on the BLM movement and racial things that's happened in the news this past week. Again, from the Daily Mail, the UK paper that gives news on American business and American happenings. The headline today was Michael Brown Sr. is now the most notable name to join the BLM 10 plus movement, okay? And the way they get the BLM 10 plus is the first 10 families affected or that founded BLM. I don't know exactly how that is. It's convoluted to me. The headline was actually Michael Brown Sr. was the first or joins the anti-BLM movement. And I thought that was amazing. It's like, what? Well, black lives don't matter now? I mean, what are you trying to say here? But I guess they realized the error of wording it that way, so they worded it different. But you have the BLM. I mean, Michael Brown Sr. is realizing what we have been saying for the past year plus, and that is BLM is a political movement. It's not a social movement. It's a political movement. They're not saying Black Lives Matter. That's nonsensical. It's nonsensical. And I certainly don't mean that to say that black lives don't matter. What I am saying that all lives matter. And I know that's politically incorrect. I don't care. I don't care. God created man in his image, and in his image, God created he, them. And so male and female, he created them. And so every person is created in the image of God, whatever color their skin in, it does not matter. They're all precious in the sight of God. So all lives matter. And if you don't like that, I don't care. Michael Brown Sr., it was his son that was killed in Ferguson, and rightly so, because he attacked an officer. That's where the whole propaganda of hands up, don't shoot came about. Lie straight out of hell, proven by ballistics, proven by what happened. So you have that. And you had this story, and it came from, I think it was from Yahoo. I don't know what source they got it from, or if it's straight from Yahoo, because they have news, and then they have news aggregates where they get stories from other places. I don't have it on my piece of paper. But they are essentially, in this story, they are lamenting the fact that there wasn't great protests after police shot and killed a black man in Honolulu, okay, Hawaii. They are lamenting the fact that there wasn't great major protests because this black man was killed in Hawaii. Now, if you go down through here, it speaks about how this couple moved from Denver to Honolulu because it had a white woman married to a black man. He was a black man from some other country. It says in here somewhere. I'm not going to take enough time to find it, but he was non-American, and but they thought that. I mean, the whole story, what it is trying to present is that Hawaii is not the racial paradise people try to seem it to be. I mean, there was a black man killed here by a police officer, and there wasn't a major protest. That's what they're trying to make it out to be. But if you read in the story, you kind of figure out why the black man got shot by officers. And it could not have been a white officer that shot him, because they do not say a white officer shot him, just that a policeman shot him. It says here, according to police's account of the fatal shooting, this man, his name is Myeni, I believe is how you pronounce it, Myeni, entered a home that wasn't his, sat down and took off his shoes, prompting a frightened occupant to call 911. Yeah, no duh. Outside the house, he ignored commands to get on the ground and physically attacked officers, leaving one with a concussion, police said. Police released 2 brief clips from body camera footage, but it's difficult to make out what is happening in the dark. A wrongful death lawsuit, Lindsay Myeni filed against Honolulu alleges police were, quote, motivated by racial discrimination towards people of Mr. Myeni's African descent. Simply by being black, he was seen as a, quote, immediate threat that the Asian woman who called 911 needed to be protected from. And so if you deconstruct what she just said, that if it wasn't a black man that came into her house and took off his shoes, then she wouldn't have called police. Come on.
Come on.
Come on. Help me out, Joe. That's what she's saying in that. I mean, just because he was black, that woman felt threatened that she had to call 911 that led to all of this stuff. And, of course, the police officers, just because he was black, ended up shooting and killing him. It's just nonsensical. Nonsensical stories to try to divide people. Speaking of which, another one on Dante Wright. Dante Wright was the black man that was killed by the Kim Potter is her name, police officer in Minnesota. If you might remember the story, it happened around the time of George Ferguson verdict, or excuse me, George Floyd verdict, and she pulled out her gun and thought it was a taser, evidently, because you see it on the body cam. She's pointing it at him and saying, taser, 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 and then she shoots one shot and realizes it's the gun, and that's when he takes off. He was being detained because he had a warrant out for his arrest and broke loose from the police as they were trying to handcuff him, jumped in his car and went to take off. And she shot him in that exchange. Now, tragic, right, wrong, or indifferent. Doesn't matter. What I do know is, and what I made this point before was, had he not resisted arrest, would not have got shot. Had he not committed whatever felony that he had a felony warrant or would not have got shot. Leads to the whole one sin leads to another, leads to another, leads to tragedy that we discussed earlier. Well, you have lawsuits filed against Dante Wright's estate this past week. And the reason might shock you. Then again, it might not. This, what is labeled, Dante Wright being labeled as a career criminal, which is amazing because he was only, 20 years old. But we find out one of the facts we already knew, but we learned some more things about Dante Wright this past week. Wright is accused of shooting a teen and former classmate on separate occasions, 2 shootings that we did not know about that he was allegedly involved in a pair of civil lawsuits against the estate. In May of 2019, 16-year-old Caleb Livingston was at a full-stop gas station in Minneapolis when Wright allegedly pulled out a gun and shot him in the head, according to one of the lawsuits. He's in a vegetative state now, known as unresponsive wakefulness syndrome. So he allegedly shot that man in the head. I don't know what evidence they have against him, but he allegedly shot that one in the head. 7 months later, he was charged with aggravated robbery. This is the one we knew about, where he choked a woman and held her at gunpoint trying to get the rent money that she had got from someone in his presence. We knew about that one, but 3 weeks before his death, he and an accomplice allegedly shot former classmate Joshua Hodges in the leg and stole his car, according to the second civil lawsuit. Now, this is the guy he shot. He was able to identify him. It says Hodges was able to identify Wright because before the carjacking, he got out of a different vehicle without a mask on. The two made eye contact, according to the lawsuit. Wright allegedly masked up and proceeded anyway. And so this Dante Wright, who you had several politicians, going to his funeral and lamenting that the police shot him in such an unjust way, he was, if this is true, and that's all I'll say, but if this is true, he was deviant, and, sooner or later a bullet was going to catch him, regardless if it came from a police gun or another one. So anyway, that was some interesting information there. All right, it's time for a break, but I'm just going to hold off. I got a lot of stuff I want to get to here in the next 27 minutes that we have remaining. One of these stories, let's go ahead and get to the COVID stuff first. Saw a story this week that, and the headline is this: heart inflammation in young men higher than expected after Pfizer Moderna vaccines. Heart inflammation in young men is higher than expected. A higher than expected number of young men have experienced heart inflammation after their second dose of Moderna COVID-19 shots from Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna, according to data from 2 vaccine safety monitoring systems, U.S. CDC said on Thursday. So this, and I want to remind you of something. Before I even get into these other stories here. The vaccines that our government is pushing, that so many, I mean, they're giving away money just so people will take the vaccine. Lottery money. Shotguns, if you're in West Virginia, and trucks, because that's what we like. This is an experimental, all of them, whether it came from Moderna, Pfizer, J&J, it doesn't matter. These were all experimental. They have not been vetted. They have not been tested. They were allowed to be distributed under emergency protocol. Okay? And if you start putting the pieces together with all this, because I've got stories that link to this one. One of the reasons why they were able to get it passed with emergency protocol is because there was no known treatment for it. There wasn't any valid treatment that they could give. It was killing people left and right, and there was no answers. But was there? Was there answers? Well, I don't know. Seems to me there could have been. There's plenty of doctors that stated that there was things that could treat COVID-19, treat it effectively, especially if it was caught early. Hydrochloroquine was one of them. And then it had others that were as well. Drugs that have been on the market for years. Drugs that the side effects were absolutely known and absolutely knew what the effects, the side effects, the chances for side effects, and how rare they would be if they were even to come, and at what doses, was necessary for the side effects to be a problem. We knew all that with hydrochloroquine. We've known it's been on the market for 60 years. But yet there was a mass fight against those that would speak out and say, hey, hydrochloroquine works. It works. If you said that, if doctors said that, they were silenced. If they went on YouTube and said, hey, this works, we know that the side effects are so rare, and especially at the doses needed to effectively treat COVID. We know that the side effects are essentially nil. We know this because it's a known quantity. It's been around for 60 years. We know this. If you went on YouTube and you posted a video like it, guess what YouTube did? They shut it down. In fact, this was months ago they shut it down. And just this past week, Ron Johnson, a senator out of Wisconsin, was suspended from YouTube because, why? Because he uploaded a video that had doctors on there that were talking about the validity of hydroxychloroquine. I don't know if I saying that right earlier, but anyway, it's hydroxychloroquine. And ivermectin. The video removal and upload ban came after two videos of the Senate committee. Listen, after two videos of the Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs hearings he led on early experimental treatments to the novel coronavirus, such as hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. These are hearings from our government entity. Does this... I mean, listen, this isn't some jackleg like me just posting some, crazy conspiracy theories, right? Because that's the way, that's the way I would be portrayed. I mean, who am I? So I can understand something like that maybe. But this is a United States senator in official U.S. capacity. Official government meetings. And they were broadcast on YouTube, and it was taken down by YouTube even now because it spreads disinformation, because YouTube is the arbiter of truth. Twitter is the arbiter of truth. Google is the arbiter of truth. Facebook is the arbiter of truth. Why? Let me ask you this. Why? Why was there such a push to silence those that spoke about hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin? Why is there such a push to silence them, even now? Why was there such a push a year ago to silence them? Says, man, listen, I know we've got a problem, but we have a solution. We have a solution. And they stopped doctors from prescribing it in some states. They outlawed doctors from prescribing medicines to their patients that they thought would help them. Why?
Where's the money?
I think it's very evident. It's very evident because you've got big pharma. You've got big pharma that has a lot of money and a lot of power. Maybe that's a good word. Got a lot of money, got a lot of power. And you have a government that is writing blank checks to all of these different pharmacies for the cure. But the cure is unknown. The cure isn't vetted. The cure was put out there, and it was put out there based on the premise that there was no cure. There was no help for people that got COVID, but there was. Why do you have, even now, YouTube saying, oh, well, we're going to silence this because of disinformation? Why do you have it even now? Because, only 50% of Americans are getting the shot? So, there's that. You have a Texas hospital that have suspended, another story in my stack of stuff, suspended almost 200 staff members because they would not get the COVID shot. You've got half the people at work at the CDC that will not get the COVID shot. But you have, here it is, nearly 200 staff members at a Houston area hospital were suspended for not following a policy that requires employees to be vaccinated against COVID-19. They were requiring employees to take an experimental vaccine. They're suspending them. Houston Methodist. Crazy. And then lastly here on the COVID front, we have Dr. Fauci. Oh, Dr. Fauci. Dr. Fauci was given an interview this past week, and this is what Dr. Fauci said.
Now you're at the focal point. What is your level of concern that we're going to discredit public health officials to the point of, look at Russia. They actually have a good vaccine, and none of their citizens will take it because they don't trust their own government.
Right. It's very dangerous, Chuck, because a lot of what you're seeing as attacks on me, quite frankly, are attacks on science. Because all of the things that I have spoken about consistently from the very beginning have been fundamentally based on science. Sometimes those things were inconvenient truths for people, and there was pushback against me. So if you are trying to, get at me as a public health official and a scientist, you're really attacking not only Dr. Anthony Fauci, you're attacking science. And anybody that looks at what's going on clearly sees that. You have to be asleep not to see that. That is what's going on. Science and the truth are being attacked.
Okay, so there's Dr. Fauci saying, since the beginning, everything's been based on science. But then here it is, what Dr. Fauci said at the beginning.
There's a lot of confusion among people and misinformation surrounding face masks. Can you discuss that?
The masks are important for someone who's infected to prevent them from infecting someone else. Now, when you see people and look at the films in China and South Korea, whatever, everybody's wearing a mask. Right now in the United States, people should not be walking around with masks.
What?
You're sure of it? Because people are
You're
listening
sure?
really
No.
closely to this.
Right now, people should not be walking. There's no reason to be walking around with a mask.
Really? Come on.
When you're in the middle of an outbreak, wearing a mask might make people feel a little bit better, and it might even block a droplet, but it's not providing the perfect protection that people
Because
think
COVID
that
is not
it is.
distributed
And
by
often,
droplets.
There are
but in
unintended
aerosol form.
consequences. People keep fiddling with the mask and they keep touching their face.
And can you get some schmutz sort of staying inside there?
Of course. But when you think masks, you should think of healthcare providers needing them and people who are ill. The people who, when you look at the films of foreign countries and you see 85% of the people wearing masks, that's fine. That's fine. I'm not against it. If you want to do it, that's fine.
But it can lead to a shortage of masks.
Exactly.
Which
That's
we're
the
starting
point. It
to
could
see.
lead to a shortage of masks for the people who really need it.
Okay, so there's Dr. Fauci at the beginning, and then here a little bit later he said
I guess
this.
my question to you is, like, the science does say masks work, right? Like, this is really important that people wear masks, and when we see big crowded events of people not wearing masks, that's not good.
Chris, I have been crystal clear for a long time in what I've been saying. I don't think there's any ambiguity of what I've been saying. Masks are important. They're effective. Combine it with physical distancing, avoiding crowds, and washing hands, and it works. End of story. It's true.
End of story. And then later on, then we got this.
Now the experts say with these variants, it's time to double up. And where to? This morning, Dr. Fauci endorsed the idea on the Today Show.
If you have a physical covering with one layer, you put another layer on, it just makes common sense that it likely would be more effective. There are many people who feel, you know, if you really want to have an extra little bit of protection, maybe I should put 2 masks on. There's nothing wrong with that, but there's no data that indicates that that is going to make a difference.
Okay, so Dr. Fauci has been clear. Listen, you attack him, you're attacking science, right? Because we just follow in the science.
And follow the science.
There's too much for me to go into with that as far as the science dictates that masks don't work. They always have, and they've known this. But that didn't matter because that did not follow the agenda. Dr. Fauci said, he's always followed the science. He's kind of started out to, but obviously that opinion changed. So when exactly did the science evolve, Dr. Fauci? Anyway, all right, moving on. We looked at how YouTube censored Ron, what was his name? Senator out of Wisconsin, Ron Johnson, how they took down that, opposing view of speaking about the alternate drugs, medications for COVID, how YouTube just took that down. Well, something interesting happened in Nigeria, and that was there was a tweet that President Muhammadu Buhari, it says Twitter deleted a fiery tweet from him that many perceived as a veiled threat against violent separatists in the nation's southeast. And then his government's information wing responded by banning the social media platform for the country. So that president sent out a tweet that they didn't like, and so they killed the tweet. They deleted the tweet. And so what did they do? They just killed Twitter. They knocked it all out of Nigeria. It says the federal government has suspended indefinitely the operations of the microblogging and social networking service Twitter in Nigeria, the country's Federal Ministry of Information and Culture tweeted on Friday. And then this is how Twitter responded. This is so classic. It is amazing that they would say this, but they did. They said, "We are deeply concerned by the blocking of Twitter in Nigeria." Twitter's public policy division tweeted in response, "Access to the free and hashtag open internet is an essential human right in modern society. We will work to restore access for all those in Nigeria who rely on Twitter to communicate and connect with the world. Keep it on." And so they said that access is a human right, literally a human right, okay? A human right to have access. Tell that to Donald Trump, right? Tell that to anybody that disagrees with Dr. Fauci on the COVID. Tell that to anybody trying to report on Hunter's laptop. Tell that to them. Hey, this is a human right, right, Twitter? I don't think so. All right, listen, I've got a few other stories I'm going to get to in the next 11 minutes. There was and this deals directly with the church. There's a story here. It says Christian, quote, prophet claims God didn't restore Trump yet to make people doubt prophecies. This is a guy by the name of Hank Kuhneman. I did not know him before, but he was doing an interview with a guy named Steve Schultz on the Elijah List. I would recommend you, Christian, to steer clear of them. He is obviously a false prophet for several reasons, but his reasoning is this. He prophesied, right? He prophesied that President Trump would be reelected. When he wasn't reelected, he prophesied that he was going to continue to be president after January 6th. You know, when they held that thing, he was going to be vindicated. He wasn't. When he wasn't, then he prophesied, or then he said that why is the Lord taking so long? Why are the prophets missing it? And he said that no, listen to me. It's to make it look like the prophets miss it, and for them to have petitions. It's to expose, but it's to bring forth something at the exact time that will be part of the fulfillment of God. In other words, God, he literally was saying, God just wants you to think that we missed. We didn't miss it. God's going to bring it about in His time. We didn't miss it. Listen, there's a lot of danger. There's a lot of danger following after false prophets such as this. And the reason why, listen, the Bible is clear. The Bible is clear in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. This is what's referenced, commonly known as the love chapter, but the authorized King James Version, God's perfect word in English, it doesn't mention love. It says charity, which is a much better word. Charity is love in action, which is what true love is. Love is an action word, right? But in comparing that, let me grab my Bible. If you look at 1 Corinthians chapter 12, you would see that Paul addresses spiritual gifts such as prophesying. He says this in verse number 1. He says, now concerning spiritual gifts, brethren, I would not have you to be ignorant. He said, I want you to know this thing. He said, ye know that ye were Gentiles, carried away unto these dumb idols, even as you were led. And he starts addressing these spiritual gifts, and then at the end of the chapter he says whether one member suffer, all the members suffer with it. He says, or one member be honored, all our members rejoice with it. He says, verse number 31, but covet earnestly the best gifts, and yet show I unto you a more excellent way. And he begins talking about charity. He begins talking about that love in action in chapter number 13. And then it continues on. It says in verse number 8, it says, charity never faileth. He says, but whether they be prophecies, they shall fail. Whether there be tongues, they shall cease. Whether there be knowledge, it shall vanish away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part. He says, but that when that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part shall be done away. When I was a child, I spake as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. That which is perfect is His word. And whenever you have these false prophets saying, oh, well, God's telling me this, God's prophesying this, that is really an affront to God's word, because God's word is perfect. He doesn't need any additional prophecies. God has revealed unto us everything that we need. He's revealed unto us everything that we need to know. And so this Christian prophet, he's no prophet at all. I mean, he's a lying prophet is what he is. And let me just say this, Christian. We don't need to be prophets. I don't need to be a prophet. We need to be parrots. That's what we need to do. All we need to do is to regurgitate what he said, not to try to come up with some new thing, right, as the Athenians sought after in their error, I might should say. And you notice, remember when the Athenians, they didn't know God. They had the altar to an unknown God. He was not known unto them. They knew a lot of different gods, but it wasn't the God of the Bible. And now I saw this story here. I'm not really going to address the story, but mainly the man who responded to it. Not even that he responded wrong in this instance to it. It's a man by the name of John Piper. The question is this: should Christian jurors find people innocent even when proven guilty? And it's a fallacious argument. And it's founded by some college professor trying to be wise using John 8 out of context. But John Piper is a man that falls right in line with the Alistair Beggs, falls in line right with the John MacArthur's. These men that are given platforms and they're held in high esteem. The R.C. Sproul's. And what they are is, and a lot of what they say, a lot of what they say sounds good, and a lot of what they say is good, but not all of it. In fact, the important parts, they're missing completely. They are what you call Reformed preachers. They are what you call Calvinists, okay? And Calvinism essentially states, they speak a lot about the sovereignty of God, and that God is a sovereign God. He's really, really sovereign. You'll hear John Piper say in this clip. And they try to, and they really don't even try, but they try to, when they're asked a question, you have a sovereignty of God. And in their mind, what they understand the sovereignty of God to be is that God has made every decision there is ever to be made, because God is overall and in control of all things. And so therefore every decision that you make, and every decision that I make, and every decision that everyone else makes, right, wrong, or indifferent, God has made that decision for them, because God is sovereign. That is their view of what sovereignty is in God. Let me tell you what, that's not the God of the Bible, okay? And so that is their view on the sovereignty of God. And so God, in other words, God makes a decision for people to sin. Now, they can't reconcile that to, and so they don't. What they do is they have they call man's responsibility versus God's sovereignty. In other words, man sins. Man is going to be held accountable for that sin. God is going to judge him for that sin. If you know your Bible, you know that there's going to be a multitude of people lift up their eyes in hell because of their sin. And so God is going to hold them accountable. But on the other hand, God in his sovereignty, their view of sovereignty, God has essentially made them make that decision. And so God has made them make that decision. They make that decision, and therefore they're going to go in hell, and God judges them for that. And they can't reconcile the two. Nobody can reconcile the two, because that makes no sense. And then they pawn it off and say, oh, well, there's mysteries in the Bible we just can't understand. Let me tell you what, that's not, there are mysteries. And I don't understand everything in the Bible, but that's not one of them. I'm going to give you John Piper's explanation, his explanation on what man's responsibility versus God's sovereignty is.
To me, when Jesus stands in front of the tomb of Lazarus and says, Lazarus, come forth, to a dead man, and he comes, that's not inexplicable, because his word created the life. Command what thou wilt.
Listen very closely. I don't know what scripture he's acting like he's quoting. I could not find it in my authorized version Bible, nor could I find anything like it. But I want you to listen closely at the beginning of this, because he's addressing something completely different, and that is something very prideful. And what he's essentially saying is that we hold the power to bring forth life out of others. Now, in a sense, I will agree with him in the sense that God has given us, we are his mouthpiece, and we are to speak the words of Christ. But where he errs is he is essentially saying that it's because of him and him doing what God has told him to do, and he's speaking God's word, and therefore he is making life in that dead person spiritually. Listen, that is actually what he's saying, and that's wrong in itself. All right, start it over.
To me, when Jesus stands in front of the tomb of Lazarus and says, Lazarus, come forth, to a dead man, and he comes, that's not inexplicable, because his word created the life. Command what thou wilt, and grant what thou commandest. This is not inexplicable. This is explicable. You're talking to dead people. They need to live. You are to call them, live! And when the Holy Spirit is at work in your life and you command the dead to live, they live.
When you command,
that's not inexplicable. It's just miraculous.
It's not biblical.
So my issue there is not, whoa, this is a fog, like a great mystery hangs over why you would call dead people to do things. You call dead people to do things because the Word of God is powerful. and creates life. Now, the first way you ask the question, is it an antinomy or a contradiction or humanly inexplicable how God can be absolutely sovereign over all human decisions and those decisions still be responsible, accountable decisions? I think that is